look stellar. And so don't fret. And like Jamie just said, you both know so much, and it wouldn't be a problem to have a little extra content because that just gives us options for what to choose, and so don't feel like you need to be too excruciating about like what exactly you say and in what order, give us some good stuff, and then we'll try to fit as much of it in as we can. So
We'll make
uh,
some rare hay out of it, given
yeah.
this rainy summer.
Okay.
Super. So I've started
Yeah.
recording. It's running. This gives us it doesn't give us a panic feeling. Do you want to just do a first run just to, go through the questions? We can do it twice if you like, or we can just start and have you run through. Why don't we do a first run, see how you feel about it? And then if we need to, we can do a second one. Does that work?
Sure.
I'm going to go off camera, Zach. I suggest you do as well. That'll make sure that we're not, a distraction. And what
Jamie,
before you, yeah,
do we need to somehow remove our squares? Is that
no,
okay?
the video editor will crop out your your video images for us.
Okay.
Yeah, super. So I'm gonna put on mute, and be sure to count to 3 before you start. Just again, that pause. This just gives a little bit of space around the conversation. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and you get started. 1, 2, and 3. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Joan Maloof. I'm the founder of the Old Growth Forest Network.
Hi, I'm Michael Kellett. I'm Executive Director of Restore the North Woods.
And we're here to talk about the role of forests in supporting biodiversity in New England, particularly the old forests.
So Joan, why don't you go first here? You recently published an update, actually, of a book that you published quite a while back called Nature's Temples, A Natural History of Old Growth Forests. So you're an old growth expert, and I think people are going to want to hear your thoughts on the status of old growth forests in New England. Where are they headed? What's the situation? Tell us all about it.
Well, I've been to a lot of old growth forests across America, but the old growth forests in New England, what I've noticed is how very rare they are. And the amount of old growth forest left is measured in tenths of a percent. So in fact, in the whole New England area, including New York, there's only 0.4% left of the original old forests. And in some states, that's much smaller. For instance, in Connecticut, it went from knowing that there was 0.202% to 0.06% with additional studies. So they're very rare. The other thing I noticed is that there's no laws that protect even these very rare places that are left. And finally, in my book, doing the research, what I discovered was the biodiversity that's found in these old forests, and that as we've lost the old forests, we've lost the biodiversity.
So why is that a problem, Joan? Maybe you can tell folks.
Well, you might have heard that we're living in the time of the Anthropocene, and what's unique about that is how one species, the humans, have really taken over and changed the earth so that the biodiversity is declining. And when you study the old forests, you'll find that there's salamander species and snail species and insect species and bird species that you're not going to find in the younger forests. So like letting the forest recover and saving what's left is very important for our biodiversity.
So what would be, how many, you said we hardly have any old growth forests now. What portion of the landscape should be old growth forests? What should be our desired goal for the future?
Well, the recent report that came out about the wild forests in New England, the Harvard report, They are aiming for a goal of 10% of our forests that are wild, meaning they can develop on their own and potentially, hopefully, to old growth forest again. But right now, there's only 3% that's even protected enough to try to reach those conditions. So certainly at least 10%, that's a minimum. I believe 30% would be better for preserving the biodiversity and keeping our atmosphere and our water quality as high as it should be for the health, not only of humans, but of all the organisms.
I can't argue with that.
And Michael, tell us more about your work. You've been so involved in rewilding, and you started Restore the North Woods 30 years ago. Can you tell us more about your work and your mission?
Well, yeah, I pulled together with a number of other people who'd been working in conservation for a long time, this new organization, because we didn't think any of the existing groups were doing enough to not only protect what we had in New England and also across the North Woods all the way to the upper Great Lakes. But also that we thought some group ought to be talking about rewilding large areas of the region. And there are all kinds of opportunities to do that. So we thought, okay, let's start with the Maine woods, which is the biggest chunk of undeveloped forest in the eastern United States. Let's talk about big wild in the Maine woods, talk about large protection there. So we proposed a 3.2 million acre Maine Woods National Park, which would be larger than Yellowstone and Yosemite put together. And this would be way up in northern Maine, which is almost all timber and paper company lands, and there's virtually no one living there. This is like almost totally uninhabited area. So you really could do it. Of course, there was a lot of pushback. Of course, there were the vested interests fought it, but it helped to create sort of the sense that this, number one, there's something worth saving here. This is not just a lot of people said, oh, well, this is just a bunch of trees, nothing special to see here, why bother? But clearly this is really a unique place that needs to be protected. So that's where we got really starting with rewilding, but then we started looking at other parts of New England too. And even though there aren't as many large giant chunks, there actually is a lot to save in the rest of New England.
So it's so important to do it from both directions, both studying what's left and the biodiversity there, and then doing something politically to make sure that not only the old pieces are preserved, but that additional pieces are restored or rewilded for the future. So can you tell us about getting the Katahdin Woods and Waters designated by President Obama? How were you able to do that? And what do you think about those protections?
Well, to talk about politics, that's a perfect example. When we proposed this national park this was like 1994, so almost 30 years ago, everybody said, oh, well, it'd be great to have a big national park, but it's politically unrealistic. It can never happen. People will never support it. There's too much opposition. Just give up and, just maybe we can save a few little patches here and there. But we kept pushing and pushing, and we found that a lot of people actually thought it was a great idea. They just were told it's not possible. And so we said, well, actually, we're not going to listen to that, because we know that almost all national parks that we have now faced major opposition when they were first proposed. The same thing, they were told, Grand Canyon, oh, you can't do that. We need to mine and we need to build dams. And Yellowstone, oh no, it's going to ruin the economy. We need to graze our cattle and log it. So that goes with the par for the course. So, but what happened is when we talked about this national park, Roxanne Quimby, a philanthropist who made lots of money in the Burt's Bees, founding the Burt's Bees company, said, I'm really inspired by this idea. I want to buy land up here in the Maine woods and donate the land to be a national park. And she did. She started buying land. She right and left, she was buying big chunks of land. And so at some point she said, gee, I'd like this to be a national park. Well, what she had was about 87,000 acres, which is bigger than a lot of our existing national parks. And it's next to Baxter State Park, this big wild area. So she wanted to donate it to be a national park. Well, the members of Congress wouldn't introduce legislation to do it. They said, no, this is too controversial, blah, And so she talked to the Obama administration and she said, what if I donate this, just like Acadia was started? Why don't I donate my land and then you turn around and make it a national monument? And sure enough, it took about 5 years of working on this, but President Obama designated it as a national monument. A national monument is basically like a national park. It doesn't have it's not as well known, doesn't have as many facilities, but otherwise it's basically like a national park. So interestingly, as soon as that happened, the opposition just evaporated. All these people who said, oh, it's going to be so big, it's going to ruin the economy, they're going to take our home away, they're going to lock everything up. All of a sudden they started going up there and they said, this is really nice. It's really nice to have this nearby national park, and gee, people are coming to our town. More people are coming, and they're investing in the town and they're buying our products. So now it's very popular. And in fact, they're talking about expanding this national monument. So it just goes to show you, people like positive things we're doing good things, we're helping nature, but we're also helping people, and people like that. So talk about politics, that's good politics as well as good for the biodiversity and the climate and the wildlife.
I think it's very interesting how a lot of times we give away our power and think, oh, the government's going to do it for us. But in cases like that, it wasn't the government at all. It was the people. You add people that have wealth, that want to use their wealth to save nature, with people like you that are politically active and that aren't going to give up. So it's a beautiful story, and I hope it spreads throughout the country and the world, where more and more individuals just take it upon themselves to save nature instead of expecting some other person in power to do it.
Well, and actually what you're doing, maybe you can talk about the Old Growth Forest Network. That's working from the grassroots up as well. You're building all across the country, you're building this grassroots support for old growth forests and nature and protecting areas. So it's the opposite of one big area, but it's the same idea. So you put it all together and we've got the whole continuum from very large areas to small local areas. So maybe you can talk about that, because you're every day it seems like you've got a new area added to the network.
Oh yeah, it's amazing how quickly we're growing. So we wanted to save whatever old growth forests were left in the country. And as I just shared, there's not that many, and we wanted to make sure that they didn't disappear. But not only that, that some older forests remain unlogged so that they can develop old growth characteristics in the future. So we're speaking for the old growth forests that are left and future old growth forests, but how we're really making this measurable is ensuring that there's at least one of these areas in each county of the United States where forests can grow. So there's over 3,000 counties, our political division, and about 2/3 of them can support forest growth. We're very lucky we live in a forested nation. So if we can preserve at least one forest in each of these counties that's open to the public and accessible, people can experience them, it will go a long way toward not only reversing the decline in biodiversity, but connecting people with the forests so they'll care about them and they can actually see what the older forests can look like. And in the
and there are a number of, oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say that, I'll pause for a second.
I was just going to say there are a number of them in New England. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the network forests in New England.
Well, it's been challenging to build the old growth forest network in New England because there aren't as many old forests left, and the protections for the old forests aren't as strong. So for instance, next week I'll be flying into Vermont, and there's an area there that we would love to have in the old growth forest network, but it doesn't have strong protections from commercial logging, and that's what we require. So I'm going to be talking to the county council members and try to convince them that they should leave this small area unlogged so it can be in the old growth forest network.
And that actually raises the issue, strong permanent protection. The wildlands report that you talked about, which the Harvard Forest was the major player in that, and they concluded that about 3.3% of New England is protected from logging and other development, but actually only about half of that is permanently protected by law. So it's only a tiny fraction of the region that actually is permanently protected. People see all this forest around them and they assume that it's being taken care of. So one of the things that we're all of us are talking about in the forest movement, including you, Joan, I know, and other people, is how do we expand the amount of protected land in New England? And I agree with you on at least 30% is a goal we ought to have. And that's consistent with the 30 by 30 idea that the UN and scientists around the world have, and also the Biden administration has endorsed of protecting 30% of the planet by 2030, which is a tall order, especially when you've only got 3% in New England at the moment. But we could raise that to at least 10% in New England if we protected all our existing public lands. And then there's a lot of private land that could be protected too. So there's a lot of opportunity. But again, we have to get people out there, just like you're doing, Joan, getting them excited about how beautiful and wonderful these places are, and we need more of them.
Yes, protecting the private lands is very important because those are our forests. They belong to us, and we should have a say in how they're managed. And if we want them,
just a pause, Joan. You actually said private forests. So can you start again? You said protecting private forests.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Can you repeat that with the same passion and just say?
I will try if I can figure out where.
Start for yeah. So give a pause and then just say the same thing, protecting public forests.
Michael, you raised a good point about public forests because it's really important to protect them because they are our forests. They belong to us. So if we want them to be rewild, at least a percentage of them, then I would hope that we're able to do that eventually. And in building the old growth forest network, we have seen places where then we could step in and make a difference in how the land is managed.
One of the things we're doing regarding public forests is in Massachusetts, there are two bills that would protect about 9% of the state of Massachusetts on public land as reserves that would be off limits to logging and so forth. And some of those, at least one of those areas, I think, is in the old growth forest network in the Mohawk Trail State Forest. But that is not protected by law. It's protected pretty well administratively, but we want it to be even more protected by law. And then there are other areas where they're doing logging and other things. So this is a really important step. And then another thing we've talked about is new national parks, because unbelievably, there are a number of places in New England. People think, oh, you have to be out west with a big wild area and draw a big line around it. There's nothing in the east you can do about national parks, but actually there are a number of areas. There are 9 areas we've identified in New England as potential new national parks, including several in Massachusetts and across the region. So, and again, those national parks protect forests from logging and other developments. So that would also increase the amount of protected land in the region. So there are a lot of ways we can do this, including both working at the community level, working at the state level, and then working at the national level for protection.
Exactly right. And one of the things we're doing right now is looking at the federal lands. And as you know, they've just done surveys on how much old growth forest is left and defining the old growth. And now we're saying, okay, let's take it the next step and let's preserve the old growth on the federal lands. So we've been able to mobilize the membership of our organization and let them know that this is an excellent time to comment if you want to make a difference in the management of the federal forest. And altogether with other groups, we've gotten 480,000 individual comments to the federal government saying they want the public old growth forest preserved on the federal land. So I feel that there's a groundswell of people that are educated about the forests and care about the forests.
And as you know, we can't take these forests for granted because we co-authored, after many months of work, we finally published a paper on why it's a bad idea to clear forests for wildlife habitat, which is a whole other subject. But one of the things I remember we found is that only about 24% of the old growth and mature forests on our national forests and Bureau of Land Management lands especially are fully protected from being logged. So even now, they could go out and log these old growth forests on our public lands. And that's why it's so important that so many people spoke up in this process and said, no, we want these forests protected. And so I'm hoping at the very least it gives them pause and it starts to shift the balance in favor of more protection.
Yeah, there's a lot to be done, but I think we're slowly making progress, and we need more people in this movement, as you know, to protect forests in their community all over the country. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Joan.
I think that was great. The only thing that I was going to jump in and maybe encourage you all to try to say again towards the end there is just to add in the word mature in a few more places alongside old growth. I don't know how much it really matters in the end, but
Yeah, I think,
you know,
Zach, we've got 28 minutes of content, and we have to boil that down to 3 minutes. So I think we have a question. One is we could run it again and see if you want to include more. It's a great job. You did a fabulous job, both of
it was
you.
great.
I think the only question I'd say is there are a number of places where you have really good content and then there's kind of a run on. So instead of having a pause, I should have interrupted you earlier to say, there's like a natural thought pause and then another thought. And I think, Michael, especially you, I think you had a thought and then it was another thought and then there was another thought. So it's hard. We'll have to do a little bit of creative editing. But you're both absolutely natural and comfortable. I don't know if you want to do a shorter version or if you're comfortable, we can edit down what you've got. Absolutely, there's plenty there to work with. I don't know if you want to have perhaps a closing statement. What are your thoughts?
Well, we could add a little short, per Zach's point, we could add a little short extra about mature and old growth forests, because that is talking about mature forests is a somewhat new thing. And we didn't talk about proforestation, so maybe we should have a little back and forth about the fact that we have, most of the old growth forests are gone, but we have all these mature forests, which are future potential old growth, and
what I
leaving them
suggest
alone.
is this. Why don't we do?
We could have a little brief discussion about that.
What I suggest is why don't we do that in a wrap up comment? So, Joan,
Okay.
you could say, Michael, any closing thoughts from your side? And then Michael, keep it short and brief. Remember, this is for a broad public audience. You're going to boil it down. It's not a long discussion. It's just like we have exactly what you just said. We have so little old forests, but we have the ability to have mature forests become old forests in the future. Keep it as a soundbite, and that will be great to have. Does it sound like a plan?
Yeah, it sounds like a good plan. And so I'll
why don't you do the whole closing again and say,
I'll do the wrap-up statement, Michael, and then I'll turn over to you, and I won't interrupt you. You can do short pauses, okay? I mean,
Okay.
between your statements, and then they can use whichever ones they want.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
can just,
we ready?
basically just to say what you've just said, and then we'll replace that out. Don't worry about the editing, we'll take care of that. So Joan, over to you to close out and turn off my video, turn off my mic, and we'll start. Remember to pause before you speak. Count to 3 in your mind. Over.
Well, Michael, thank you for having this discussion with me today. It's been great to be able to talk with you about our forest work. Do you have any wrap-up thoughts for us?
Thanks, Joan. It's been great to talk. And one last thought is that we have talked about how there's so little old growth forest left. Luckily, we have some, especially in the West, but there's not that much. The good news is there's still quite a bit of mature forest, and there's forest growing back in the East that's becoming mature forest. Those mature forests are future old growth if we protect them and leave them alone. And there's a new word that's been coined to describe that process, which is called proforestation. And it's basically leaving forests alone, letting them grow back, and reaching their ecological pinnacle of maturity and eventually old growth. So there's millions of acres of forest in the US where that can happen. So that's our task, is to promote that happening in the next few years, next few decades.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to pause recording.